All right, Entree Architect community, it's 4 p.m. Eastern, which means it's time for the Entree Architect Context and Clarity live conversation for Thursday, April 21st, 2022. Thanks for joining us today. As you get here, say hi. Let us know that you're here and let us know where you're joining the conversation from. If you've never been here before, we have literally a worldwide community that's joining us, and we have maybe an expanded community today. We'll talk about that here in just a minute with a little working togetherness on the conversation today. So say hi. It's fun to see where in the world everybody is, and not only in terms of the platform that you're coming in from, Facebook or LinkedIn or otherwise, but also where in the physical, the real world you are. So say hi when you get here. If we've never met before, my name's Jeff. I'm in Indianapolis. I come here every weekday afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern for one reason, so that we can find clarity around the things that matter most to you, the architect. Doesn't matter if you're the employee of a firm or you own your own firm, or even if you're a student. All of you are welcome here. Maybe you've circled a date on the calendar and you said 2022 is my year and you're on the runway to starting your own thing. Or maybe you have owned your own firm for a year or 10 years or 28 years. And you're starting to rethink or reimagine what that firm could or maybe even should be. Maybe you're a student that's a few years from being out in the quote unquote real world and you're wondering what's in store in the architecture profession for you. Whatever your context is, this is a place for you. We cover one topic every day. They're all the need to know topics for the success of small firm architects. So we're glad that you're here for this conversation today. As usual, for these Context and Clarity live conversations, I'm joined by my co-host, Katharine MacPhail. Hi, Katharine.
Hi, Jeff.
How are you today?
I'm doing really well. Today's one of the days that the leaves just seem to pop out all in one day, and I think today's the day. So it's just
That's
amazing
good.
that just amazing that it just comes back and it just keeps going. Life just keeps going on, even though you think it won't. That's my thought for the day.
So that's a good thought
Ooh,
for the day. Just keep
yeah,
swimming, I guess. Okay, Dory.
yeah.
Um, hopefully
uh,
it doesn't happen in Boston the way it did in Indianapolis. Everything popped out. We have a beautiful cherry tree in our front yard,
oh, yeah, I
and it
saw your
snowed.
pictures. Yeah,
We had about an inch of snow on the cherry tree
I know. I
this
saw
week.
that. At first, I
It's
thought, what a
bizarre.
pretty picture Jeff took, and then I saw there's snow all over them, and it
Yeah.
had a different meaning.
And it's
But
also 70 degrees today. So,
yeah,
welcome to the Midwest.
yep.
Well,
Springtime.
it is springtime. You never know what to expect. Probably around most places.
Yeah.
Um, as I look at my screen right now, let's see. It looks to me like, am I correct in saying that Christian is first into the room today? Is that right? I'm looking at that right. Yes.
Mm,
Um,
yes.
is that what you see?
Yes, I was on
Okay.
the wrong
So
end. Yep.
yeah, I get confused. It's backwards of what we're used to seeing on most platforms. But so that means that Christian is the first in today. He is the winner of today's John Kenny Memorial Crocheted Bathtub Award. If you're not familiar with that, we give that award away every single day for the first person into the room. It's named after one of our friends and community members who passed away, and inspired the competition to be into the room first, into the conversation first. So Christian, welcome back from Ithaca, New York, and Scott Thrift from San Francisco. Leah, welcome back. I'm glad that you found it this time. We had some technical difficulties yesterday between Zoom and Facebook. I'm not sure, but we're not using Zoom today, so that seems to maybe have cleared it up. Glad you found us today, Leah. Barry, welcome from Scotland and LinkedIn. Glad you're joining us. Jake, welcome from East Aurora, New York, and Jefferson from Los Angeles. Kurt's over there on Twitch. Good afternoon from Flint, Michigan, Kurt, and the rest of everybody that's coming in. Great to have so many people in this conversation already. Great to have you here. If you are commenting right now and your comments are not showing up on the screen, there's a good chance, I'm going to guess, that you're probably joining from a Facebook group. We're streaming out to a couple of extra places, a couple of places that we don't normally stream out to today, but I do know that two of the places that we're streaming to on Facebook are closed Facebook groups, which means there's permissions, right? There are rules in place. There's a solution for this. At the bottom left corner of your screen right now is a URL, chat.restream.io/FB, as in Facebook. If you paste that URL into your browser. Within a couple of clicks, you can give Facebook permission to communicate with Restream, which is the platform that we use here. And then your likeness and your comments should show up on the screen like the ones that you see streaming by right now. So if you're joining from Facebook and for some reason, you're commenting, you're saying hi, you're doing all those things and it's not showing up, try that. chat.restream.io/FB. We have found that that's really the solution to all of the world's problems. So check that out, chat.restream.io.fb. All right. With that, again, lots of people joining us. Great to have all of you.
Lots of customers today.
Lots of customers today. Absolutely. It's great to have everybody. I see Virginia. I see Las Vegas. I see Puerto Rico. That's awesome. Arizona, Birmingham, Alabama. Excellent. Stockton, California, which means that's got to be Tim Dearborn back from his walk. Great to have all of you here. Mark LePage joining from sunny North Carolina. Ed from Des Moines, Iowa. Alan's in Vermont. Melanie, a new Charlotte resident. Glad to have you with us today. And hey, Brian in New Jersey. Great to have all of you. And if you've joined us and you haven't said hi yet, say hi. Let us know that you're here and let us know where you're joining the conversation from. Even if you're just planning to listen in or multitask, that's okay. We're not requiring that you participate in the conversation, but it's great to see who all is here. It's great to welcome all of you to the community and to the conversation here today. We're going to have a little bit of a different look today. If you're familiar with Context and Clarity Live, you're used to seeing Katharine and I and a guest. We're going to do something a little bit different today. Mm-hmm. Different structure, a different look. We're going to have a panel discussion today. So let me set the stage. Let me set the stage and give you a little bit of background and also a warning. I guess seems a little bit strong to say it that way, but maybe it's necessary to do it that way. On March 25th, SCI-Arc, the architecture school in California, hosted one of their regularly scheduled base camp panel conversation. This one was titled "How to Be in an Office," and as you may have noticed, there's been a lot of strong reaction to that panel. The purpose of that panel was to give SCI-Arc students, some idea of what to expect and how to prepare for their future in the profession of architecture. So that's the background. I'm going to leave it right there. Our intent is to use that discussion as a springboard for our own panel discussion. We feel that the conversations that we've been having all week and this conversation that we're about to have are incredibly important for the future of the profession of architecture. They're important to students. They're important to emerging professionals, also leaders in the profession. So that's why we want to have this conversation today. Now, here's the warning. We are not here. Our intent is not to discuss SCI-Arc. It is not to discuss any of the panelists, any of the panelists or the panelists from the SCI-Arc discussion, any of their practices, any of that. If that's the conversation you want to have, there's lots of places around, lots of places on the internet where you can have that discussion. They're ongoing. There's articles you can read. There's videos you can watch. You can go do that wherever you want to. Our intent is to have a positive conversation about a way forward, about ways that we can improve the future of the profession of architecture so that we can talk about what it's like, what it could be like, maybe what it should be like to work in architecture. Our intent is to have a conversation that's valuable to students, people that are currently students, to emerging professionals, and by extension, leaders in the profession that can hear what we're saying, hear what's being discussed, see the comments that are coming through from all of you in the audience, and adjust accordingly. So that's our intent. Again, if you want to talk about the whole SCI-Arc thing, there's lots of places to do that. You're welcome to jump out and go to one of those places. No problem. I don't have any problem with you doing that. Yeah.
Okay.
But
don't do it here.
Or else, yeah, right. This is just not the place for that. That being said, you are welcome here to this conversation because we want as many voices in this conversation as possible. It's important for us to get an inclusive view and diverse view of where we are and where we should be headed. So all of that's a lot. That's a big, long introduction, probably a lot of rambling. So apologies for that. Let me introduce our panelists. We're going to welcome today Michael Riscica. He's the founder and creator of Young Architect. We're going to welcome Rachel Gresham. She's an associate at TMPartners. And we're going to welcome Michael Celauro. He's a department manager at Summit Design and Engineering Services. So let me bring our panelists in.
And I'm going to go backstage.
All right. Bringing everybody in. Excellent. We've got everybody. Everybody can hear us. And as part of this setup, as our panelists are coming in, I wanted to first say thank you to Michael Riscica, because I reached out to him maybe a week ago and said, hey, this is what we want to do. We want to have this conversation. What do you think? Are you interested in it? Who would you suggest pulling together for a panel? And we kick some things around. And thank you to Michael for really partnering with us on pulling this together and being a part of this conversation. Thanks to the Young Architect community for being a part of this conversation as well.
Thanks for the opportunity, Jeff.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to have all three of you here, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. You know, it's like I said, for all the kerfluffle, or however you say that word, that excuse me, that's surrounding the whole SCI-Arc conversation. I think the real positive is that it's brought a lot of these things to light and really inspired people to have conversations about what it's like to work in architecture. And so for those of you who are not familiar with what we do at Context and Clarity, we have these, what we call Context and Clarity Live every Thursday. Like I said, usually it's a guest, but we have our 3 guests today. But then we design our entire week around what we're going to talk about on Thursday. So all week this week, we've been talking about different aspects of working in architecture. So I'll give you a quick rundown. On Monday, we asked the question, what does it take to be a good employee and what does it take to be a good boss in an architecture firm? Tuesday, we talked about disillusionment. Ask the question, is there disillusionment in architecture? And if so, why is there disillusionment and what do we do about it? Yesterday, we talked about these maybe some aspirational ideas, maybe ethereal ideas about work-life balance versus work-life alignment or integration versus total dedication to the profession or total dedication to the firm. Today, obviously, we're having this panel discussion, and then tomorrow we're going to wrap up the week by asking the question, how do you find your role in the profession? Because there's lots of different things that you can do in the profession. There's a lot of roles that need to be filled in that. And I have no doubt that we'll touch on some or maybe all of those here in this conversation today. But that's what the week has looked like and what it's going to look like as we wrap it up, kind of the thing that we do around here, shape an entire week around a theme. So that's a lot of rambling. I've introduced each of you just briefly with your name and your title. So why don't we just kind of go around the table, so to speak, and maybe if you could say just a little bit about what you're passionate about and maybe your perspective as we start this conversation, how you're coming to this discussion today. Mike Riscica, you want to start?
Sure. You guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. So what I'm passionate about is I run Young Architect, youngarchitect.com. And really, over the years, I've been really focused on helping the next generation of architects succeed. That's kind of been our mission is what can we do to help you succeed in your career? A big part of what I've been passionate about over the years has been architecture licensing. My experience getting my architecture license was a complete disaster. And as soon as it was done, I pretty much hit the ground running, saying, how do we prevent other people from experiencing what I went through with getting this thing? And it's really been around that. But at the same time, I've created the Architect podcast where it's about hearing from other people. We've created a conference which helps, emerging professionals with their personal and professional development. But really, it's always been that the thread that ties it all together is helping the next generation of architects succeed. When it comes to working in offices, I've had, I worked in architecture offices for many years, and then through a weird, strange turn of events, I ended up taking a role working as an owner's representative. And in a weird way, I went from being the architect, from drawing every line, to now being an owner's representative and hiring architects to draw the lines for me. And even though I wasn't the architect, I actually felt more like an architect, kind of now being the decision maker rather than the executor of all of this work. And that was really where I shined in my career. And the funny thing was that it took me 5 or 6 years to figure that out. I spent 5 or 6 years, being a technician, working really hard, thinking that's what I was good at, before I actually really started to understand that project management was my true passion and really where I shined. And in a weird way, it was never no regrets. I mean, all those years I spent being a technician, working in an office, drawing every line, fighting with the computer software, was time well spent, because I really think it helped me understand how to be a good project manager. And I think kind of my big takeaway is that it's a long game. Architecture is a long game. It's a long path. There's many things that you could do with this career and this education, and we're not all kind of moving. No, we're not all the same, and so there's just a lot of options and variety and things you can work on.
Yeah, and I'm sure we're going to get into that more, but I think that's a great jumping off point. Maybe I'll go to Rachel next. Where are you coming to this conversation from?
Hi, folks. I'm Rachel Gresham. I'm here in Central Time in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm an associate at TMPartners and a project manager as well. I'm also getting my master's of business administration on the nights and weekends, just, because I'm a glutton for punishment, I guess, at Belmont University here in Nashville. I'm really passionate about this topic of finding the right cultural fit for young folks. And Michael actually has helped me push this passion a lot. Early on in my career, I got to experience lots of different work environments. I had 3 different jobs less than 3 years out of school. And Liz Sloan, who is here, I see her, hi Liz, was actually a really formidable part of that tumultuous time in my career. I experienced a layoff after my second job, and she was there to give me a position as the Emerging Professionals Liaison on the local AIA Central Virginia chapter. So now I'm here in Nashville, and after experiencing those different kinds of work cultures and work environments, I was able to do a lot of internal reflection to find out, what kinds of questions do I really need to be asking when I'm looking for a job, when I'm looking for a cultural fit. And then that passion has grown into really believing that it's the business of architecture that starts to create those cultures, and it's really at the root of how we experience a culture. So that is where I am coming from today, and I hope I'll get to pepper in some of my latest academic research about these fun topics as we chit-chat.
Well, we can't pass up the academic research, because I think this is probably an entire audience who are somehow gluttons for punishment. So we've got to get the academic into it. Michael Celauro, can you tell us where you're coming to the conversation from?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I'm Michael Celauro. I'm at Summit Design and Engineering. We're a firm based out of North Carolina primarily. I'm here in Raleigh, North Carolina. We actually spread through most of the Southeast at this moment and touch a little bit upon some states out west. So growing firm, but we are more on the engineering side. We're actually an engineering-based firm, about 400 employees, but only about 15 architecture employees. So much different environment where I am. And I've been here for about 6 years now. And I come to this a little bit of what Rachel had talked about, more from the business side. I kind of come through school and the career in the traditional standpoint of I knew what I wanted to do at a young age. I knew I wanted to be in architecture since I was really 3, 4, 5 years old. I've kind of worked around architects. I didn't have any in my family, but through just offices I've been at, and I've been interning with architects since high school and senior year of high school. So I've enjoyed the profession. I've wanted to get into it, but what I've had more passion about is less about the design of architecture, but more about the business side of it. I'm much more passionate about the business of things and the marriage of the two. How do I take what I love in architecture and design and understanding the business side of it and bring them together? So that's where I come from here.
So thank you, all three of you, for those introductions, and it gives us, there's several really great intersections in your three stories that we probably ought to dig into. Maybe the place to start is there's a variety. You've all worked in a variety of roles, and between the three of you, there's a variety in the roles that you've worked. So if you're a student, I teach in a master's program. I teach pro practice in a master's program. And, the students that I have are generally a year, maybe 2 years from exiting. They're all, they've had internships and things like that. But as you're preparing, thinking about your future in the profession, do you have any advice for how to start looking and how I think there's exploration has to be a part of it, I think. Right, you've got to find the right fit, and I know, Rachel, you've got some real strong feelings and study on this. But how do we go about as a student, assuming that it's not like when I graduated, where you send out 3,000 resumes and just hope to get an interview? The economy was terrible, right? Assuming that we have some choices and some freedoms there, how do we start looking for a place that's the right fit? Does anybody have any advice on that? Rachel, do you want to start with that?
Sure, I'd love to start. We must start with looking inwards. We must start with ourselves before looking outward to find something that might work for us. Understanding ourselves, understanding our wants, understanding our needs, and particularly now, more important than ever, is our boundaries. And so what I like to do, or what I like to tell folks that are graduating or looking for a job, is know thyself first, and then you can find an alignment with a workplace. So when you're interviewing, or when you're looking through a firm's social media, or you're looking through a firm's website, you can start to see, oh, are they posting things that are in alignment with my priorities? Are they posting things that are in alignment with the type of culture that I want to be a part of? And then when you get to the interview phase, it's asking the right questions that will get you the information that you're looking for to your questions, the information that you need about, will your boundaries be respected, the information that you need about the growth and development that you're looking for. So my first piece of go-to advice is know thyself.
I think that's good advice. So I didn't mention earlier that parallel to all of our context and clarity conversations that we have every afternoon, we have what we call our coffee talk on the Clubhouse app every weekday morning. And somebody on Clubhouse this morning mentioned this idea of, at one point in their career, maybe when they were young, I hope I'm getting the story right, or when they were, maybe fresh out of school, they chased projects or maybe project types. And then as they matured, maybe gained more experience, they started looking more towards what you're talking about, those alignments. And, I think that could be a natural thing, but I think what you're talking about is really great advice.
I think that when we're younger, the learning curve in the profession is so steep that it doesn't really matter what type of project that you're working on. You're going to be, for lack of a better metaphor, drinking from a fire hose. I mean, it's just so much information coming at you. I mean, you're literally just learning how to exist in an office and how to do the work. And you can learn that on any project type. And I think the first 5 to 7 years of my career, I was just learning what I liked, learning what I didn't like. And so it's also an evolutionary and iterative process in finding the thing that's right for you. I will promise everyone listening that you're not going to get it right the first time. Just be prepared. I mean, the likelihood that you're going to find the perfect workplace the first time that you find a job outside of school, it's very low.
That's great advice. I had a student a couple of years ago that was having sort of an existential crisis, right? And I don't know if architecture is for me, that kind of thing. And they had, they're a student, right? They've had academic experience and very, very limited professional experience in an office. And the only advice you can give at that point, I think, is just to say, listen, you need to explore more. You need to see what else is out there, because if your experience is all small firm or all big firm, it is not a problem that's not a fit for you, right? We just need to explore and find the right fit. So that's great advice, Rachel. Michael, MR or MC, any reflection on the topic? Go ahead.
I want to echo a lot of what she had said, and honestly, what I've done and what I highly recommend anyone do is just get out there and test these different firms. Test the small, the medium, the large, the boutique, whatever that firm is, whether it's a firm that specializes in one project type or one that does a little bit of everything. Because you really don't know until you actually get into it and really start working through it. And just because a firm specializes in something that you may have passion about, a certain project type, and you don't get into that firm, and it's a firm that's maybe the project type isn't what you're most excited about. As Rachel said, there's a lot to learn, and a lot of the key concepts come from any project that you can then apply to others. So it's not over at that point. But to the last point there, be okay with recognizing when the firm you're in is not the right fit for you, to move on. Because just like firm leaders, you need the right employees for what you as a firm are trying to do. As employees, as a person, you need to make sure that you're doing what you want to do, what's right for you. So don't look at it as you get this job and it's not great and it's permanent. There's a million jobs out there. There's a million different firms all over the world. It's just a matter of how far are you willing to reach to go look for another one and find the one that's the perfect fit for you. And we're all different. What I enjoy, what I like from a firm is not what you like from a firm. And we need to recognize that. But it all comes back to you need to know.
Yeah, that's great advice. It's great advice. The other Monday, I guess it was, when we were talking about good employee, good boss, I guess, good employee, good employer, right? It's a two-way street. And there's a time when, just as you said, it may be time for you to go. I told the story the other day of probably the best place I've ever worked, favorite place. I was in leadership at the firm, favorite boss, all those things. I got burned out, the literal definition of burnout at that firm. And thankfully, I realized that it wasn't healthy for me or my family or the firm or our clients or anything for me to remain there. It's pretty bizarre to say I left probably the perfect firm for me, or at least my favorite place, because I needed to, and everybody needed me to. So I think your point is really, really important. We need to know, not hopefully that you don't get to that point of burnout, but we need to know that it's okay, and there is a time to say, hey, I need to find something else. This isn't the right fit, whatever the situation is. Great advice. How about you, Mike Riscica?
Yeah. Well, when I graduated school, I pretty much graduated right into the heart of the recession. And, I came out of school thinking I was going to work in all these, boutique-y, Arc Digest, Arc Daily architecture firms. And I ended up taking a job that they had work. And, I as crazy as it sounds, most of my architecture career, I worked on a lot of unglamorous projects. It was solid work. It was honest work. It was stuff that had to get done, but it was never going to win an award or make its way or make me famous. but it was a good training grounds for me to really understand what a project was and how to work on it, and what my role is and what my strengths were. As time went on, and towards the end, before I became self-employed, what I really started to pay more attention to than anything else was, in a weird way, less about the architecture and the design. It was more about what is my role? What is the work? How, am I going to make money doing this? And who am I going to be working with? Who am I going to be working with? And how I was going to spend 40 hours a week became a much bigger part of the question, in making sure satisfying that more than anything else. And in a weird way, I started to realize that I would prefer to enjoy myself, work with people I like for 40 hours a week, than work on some glossy skyscraper that'll be in every magazine, but I'd be miserable, working crazy overtime, and not getting paid very much. So in a weird way, my doing the work and enjoying myself while doing it kind of preceded what my original architecture ambitions originally were. So
I think that's a great point. And there's a saying, I don't remember who it's attributed to anymore, but it's you are the you're the average, or you're the sum. It's a mathematical term. You're the sum of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And I'd heard that for years. And one day I don't know why, but one day I sat down and figured out, it's like, hey, wait a minute. I think a lot of us think those 5 people, that's surely my family and my closest friends and things like that, but it's not, right? Or at least pre-COVID, it was not. You'd go to the office and you're around those people and your clients and all of that. You start to total up the hours, waking hours, let's say, and all of a sudden you realize it's not your family, right? It's not your friends, it's the people that you work with. And that, if you think about it in those terms relative to what Mike was just saying, that may cause you to think about who you're working with. I had one of those epiphany moments where I said, you know what, I don't want to be the average of this, and needed to look for something else. So that's great advice as well. Now, I know Michael Celauro and Rachel, you both have sort of this intersection of interest in the business and culture structure of the firm, culture of the firm. When, maybe once we've gotten that first job, or we've moved on to the second job, or whatever it is, what is it that we need to be paying attention to? How do we navigate everything that's going on? There's always this, 40-hour week versus 60-hour week. There's, toxic workplaces, family oriented, hybrid. There's all kinds of things that swirl around, especially, I don't know if we call this post-COVID or what we call this, but especially after the last couple of years that we've been through. What do we need to pay attention to in terms of the actual workplace when we're out here working in the profession? Anybody want to take that one? Go ahead, Rachel.
I can jump in here. I think the first thing that I pay attention to, and I like to pay attention to it during an interview, is how people treat one another and how people are interacting on their teams. If people enjoy spending time outside of work with one another. To Michael's point, it's the people that you work with that end up making or breaking your experience. And then if you're new to the industry and it's one of your first jobs, I think just dive in there and be a sponge. I mean, what kind of learning is going on? The other thing that I like to encourage people to ask during interviews is what types of education are available at the firm. Are folks that are in higher levels of the firm offering education and disseminating their knowledge? Are they a learning-based firm? What's the attitude towards emerging professionals and getting their license? What's the attitude about just being able to ask anyone in the firm how to do something, or how to understand how a wall section detail goes together? At TMPartners, it's built in to the culture. everyone here, anyone who asks a question of anyone here, they're going to be happy to answer it. They're going to be happy to sit down with you and talk through something. And if they don't have time, or they can't, or you've asked the wrong person, they're not going to shoo you away. They're going to say, actually, this person knows a lot more about writing specs than I do. I think that you should go talk to them. They'll be happy to help you. So the learning environment is something I think is super important to young architects. And then as you kind of learn to navigate that and you understand where your resources lie in a firm, I think it's important to start looking at things like the structure. And if you can look at this in your interview, that's great. It's something that wasn't really important to me and wasn't really apparent to me until later on in my career, when I started to realize that the structure of a firm is what really ultimately at the end of the day informs what the culture is. So looking at things like incentive structures, those can affect what motivates your fellow employees and how they motivate tasks on a team. Chains of command can influence the personal relationships and the closeness that you have with your colleagues. Authority and power dynamics can influence comfortability with who people talk to things with, and your professional challenges, and how perhaps a challenge that you bring to someone will be taken. And then title and task allocation. Are folks really paying attention to what your capabilities are, what your soft skills are, what you really want to be working on? You know, the farther you move up, the more you're going to be wanting to spend time on the things that you really enjoy or the things that you're really good at. And is there time and attention paid to title and task allocation and putting people in the right seat to get the project across the finish line or help a business run?
Do you have any advice? I mean, you mentioned interview, right? So I don't know how I heard about the job. Maybe I saw it on LinkedIn or something like that, but I've somehow landed myself an interview. Maybe I'm nervous. I really want this job. And I'm paying attention to, did I dress right? And, things like, am I remembering the person's name? Things like that. What suggestions do you have? Maybe specific questions or ways. Maybe it's in the interview, or maybe it's the research that you do leading up to it. But what suggestions do you have in helping us sniff out the structures that you're talking about and the cultural issues that you're talking about?
You can ask about anything you want in an interview, and I like to say that a firm knows almost everything about you by the time you walk in that door, except for your social security number. And they're just really looking to see if you're going to fit in. At least that's how it works at TMPartners where I am. That's how our interview process really goes. It's like, okay, on paper, this person looks like they have the skills and the capabilities that are required to fill this position. Now, are they going to fit in? And to Jacob Fitton's question, can one individual swing a culture one way or another? I think that if the culture is strong enough, those single folks find themselves not working there anymore, either of their own volition or something else. In an interview, sniffing out these things, I mean, you just have to be brave enough to ask. And I mentioned earlier the incentive structures. What are the chains of command? What does the leadership pipeline look like? One hot topic that I'm talking about a lot lately is what's the criteria for moving up in the firm, and trying to suss out whether there's a lattice of leadership versus a ladder of leadership, because those types of things are really going to affect your existence in the firm and how you move up and what skills you might hone. So those are just some things that, I mean, it's just don't be afraid to ask about anything. What else did I mention here? Authority and power. I mean, don't be afraid to ask, how are tasks allocated? Do we have a team meeting every week? How are projects staffed is a really big one. Asking about how projects are staffed will get a lot into, are you being hired to get put on a project that's just on fire, or are you getting hired because there's an intentional strategic growth to the firm and an alignment of where your skills are going to fit into the overall goals of the business? So I bet Michael C., you have some things to add to that.
He's definitely nodding his head over there.
Yeah, I agree with it, almost everything you've said. And actually, Evan just brought it up. We have to understand that interviewing is two ways. interviewing is not the employer interviewing the employee for a job opportunity. It is the employee or potential candidate interviewing the firm for their fit, and it speaks back to what we were just talking about. I've had several interviews in the past with firms, and while they've handed me offer letters, I knew that that firm was not my fit. It wasn't what I wanted after going to the interview and talking to people, very similar to what Rachel had just mentioned. So that is important, just to understanding purely from the interviewing side is you need to ask questions just as much as they ask you questions, whether it's to the people directly interviewing you, the hiring manager, or find some way to ask the people interviewing you to talk to people who work there, because you're going to get a different perspective from those who are actually working there. And ideally, someone at the same level or position that you're applying for. If you're applying for an entry level job, maybe talking to another leader in the firm isn't the right person to talk to, but others at that same level, so you can get a better understanding of how you are going to fit in at that level. It same goes with that, asking about projects, asking about who's on your team. What do they intend on having you do immediately or in the near future? Are you there just to fulfill a project because you have hours on it, you have work to get done, and you just don't have the staff for it right now? Or are you going to have some type of role in that job that's beyond just drafting because you just need man hours on the job? So just ask a lot of questions. I mean, that's all I can say is, and going back to your original question about what to look out for when you're there, Rachel's comment of be a sponge is exactly what I was going to say. Just observe everything. Take it all in, because it speaks back to the first topic we had about learning internally what you want. As you're absorbing that information, you're realizing what fits and what doesn't fit with you. It could speak to whether or not that is still where you want to be, whether you want to move on, or maybe it's not perfect, but you know that you want to be there. Maybe you are that person who starts to implement the change. But if you don't absorb it, it's not going to go as well. Don't also be the person to come in and just demand change when you know absolutely nothing yet. Make sure you understand first. We've had a ton of those people. I think a lot of people do, and it just doesn't go over very well. So first understand, and then make change if you're trying to stay, or make change with yourself and just move on.
That's great advice. Mike Riscica, I want to ask you the same question, and then pivot towards maybe talking about licensure and advancing in careers. But what, in terms of finding once we found it and we get into the firm, what do you do? How do you start to excel, and then we can start to look towards the future, I guess.
Yeah. One of the things that I wish I did for myself when I was working in a firm, and letter to myself, previous self, is I wish I documented all my accomplishments. I would do a lot of really good work and fix things and do a lot of, on my day-to-day, constantly be like leveling up things up, but I never kept track of any of this stuff. And when time came for me to, ask for a raise or have my reviews or any of this stuff, I was like, oh, what did I accomplish? Like, I don't know, maybe it's just a me thing, but I'm really bad at looking back and reflecting on things, whereas I'm always looking into the future. And so that's something that I've started to do more and more the older I've gotten. I've learned from mistakes. But yeah, I would say document your accomplishments. It will help your self-worth. When you're young and you don't have a lot of experience, having these things that you have accomplished and having that list really will help your confidence as you get there. So, yeah.
I think that is really great advice. It is, like you said, it's good for your self-image and your image of your own self-worth, but it's also extremely hard to advocate for yourself if you don't have those things documented. Yeah. And you really, really need to. I don't care if you're a year out of school or you're 20 years out of school, you have to understand that you have to advocate for yourself. So that's fantastic advice. As we maybe start looking at the next phase of working in a firm and start thinking about licensure. So maybe question number one, and this is a question I've avoided kind of all week because maybe it takes us off too far off on a different tangent. But I guess question number one, does everybody that graduates from architecture school need to be licensed?
No. Nope. There is a lot of really successful people who are more successful than all of us right here who never got their architecture license. It's not a guarantee for anyone. It doesn't mean anything. And I'm, while I'm in the business of getting people licensed, if this isn't what you want to accomplish in your personal and professional life, then don't do it. You might be better off. You would be better off in the long run. It is such a huge time commitment. If it was easy, everyone would be licensed and it wouldn't mean anything. Whereas it's hard. It's a lot of work and it's a lot of time. It's the time. I always tell people it's not about being smart enough or being able to do this. It's about, do you have the time to do this? I don't think everyone needs to get licensed. And I've learned that's a very controversial opinion with some of the older generations.
Yep.
But if that's not what someone wants to accomplish in their life, there's nothing wrong with never getting it. And you could still be very successful in the architecture profession.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Go ahead, Rachel.
I was going to say, I think that just it aligns with, what are your goals? Is getting your license going to help you accomplish the goals that you have set out for yourself? And, your goals right outside of school might be to get licensed. And then 5 years down the road, you might look in the mirror again and say, you know what, this effort just doesn't really align with what I'm trying to accomplish here. So I think it goes back to knowing yourself again and whether licensure is important for what you are trying to do with your life.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's a great point. Mike Riscica, when we're thinking about, because that is your world, like you said, you're in business to help people get licensed. What are we looking at in terms of how do we want to approach this? Why is it if that does meet your goal? Why? What do we need to know from the employee point of view? What do we need to look at from the firm point of view when it comes to licensure?
Yeah. Well, first thing, before I answer that question, I've been saying this more and more lately is, if you decide that you want to become a licensed architect, getting that license will become the most important project of your entire architecture career. All of these other projects that you're working on or whatever your boss thinks is important, none of that stuff's going to ever have the return on your investment like becoming a licensed architect. Someone posted in the chat earlier, not everyone has to get licensed. I've never met anyone who is licensed that said it was a waste of time or regrets it. And I truly agree with that. Everything in my life changed after it was over. And what I didn't realize was that the payout, but I'm not even talking about money, more about the opportunities, the payout with opportunities and things I could do after I got licensed. I didn't realize it was as huge as it is. And so that's why I highly advocate it. Now, when it comes to getting licensed and working in a firm, because this is your most important project, you got to realize that while the firm says that they support you and they want you to get licensed, they want you to get your work done as well. And some firms may be more open to you getting your work done. And it might, with whatever the situation is, there's a million variables. I've seen, firms who pat themselves on the back and say, we support our emerging professionals, but then they work people 50, 60 hours a week. And yes, they'll pay for their tests and they'll provide all this information for them. Do they have the time or energy to get it done? And so that's something to consider. I've had people call me on the phone and say, Mike, I hate my job. I hate my boss. I saved a lot of money. Do you think I should quit my job and work in a restaurant and so I can finish my last 2 exams and then go get a new job once I'm licensed? And I said, if you could work it, yeah, why not? That sounds like great. So I think understanding that working and getting this license at the same time, it's got to work together. One of the things I've been telling a lot of people too is if you are working in a firm and you're working towards getting your license, even if you're a year away, have the conversation now. What will change once I'm licensed? there's always this, I see it with a lot of people, they wait until they finally got that piece of paper and now they're expecting a big raise and they get a fraction of what they thought they were going to get. Have the conversation sooner. Maybe the firm has plans to incorporate you into the structure of how things are as a licensed architect. And then sometimes, the firm hired you right out of school. It was not a part of their business model to have you as a licensed architect to pay you all this extra money. So you might have to go get a new job to get the raise that you're looking for. And that's pretty common. But I would start the conversation sooner than later. Don't wait until after it happens. Have it be a part of the dialogue as it's going on.
I think that's great advice. And in the rounds that I make, in my network, I hear the stories all the time. Right. And I've witnessed them over the years. Right. That's sort of one of those natural breaks where you're often, you have gotten your license or registration, depending on what your state calls it. And then, this is when you make that move to the next firm, your next position, in search of that payoff. Right. And it's, it happens, but I think that's great advice. Maybe it doesn't have to, but you need to know as you're headed there. So believe it or not, we're almost to the top of the hour. I knew this hour was going to go very, very quickly. Maybe that's a great segue to kind of flip this around 180 degrees all of a sudden and start to look at it from the employer point of view. And I suspect, that Michael, you'll have some thoughts about this. Both Michaels will probably have some thoughts about this. Rachel as well. But what about advice for probably a large portion of this audience that's looking to hire people? Just about everybody I know has been crazy busy for a long time, and they're looking for people. They want to be a great boss. They want to be a great employer. What do they need to know? What do they need to be thinking about in terms of looking for and hiring young, whether coming right out of school or emerging professionals, wherever they are, whatever's appropriate in their career? Who wants to kick that one off?
I can go with that one. So we currently have a bunch of young professionals that we've hired in the past, I'd say 18 months now. We've probably brought on board 4 or 5 in the past 18 months. So my biggest advice is when we were looking for younger professionals, we were looking for people who had soft skills. Hard skills are a lot easier to train. We primarily use Revit, and we had people who've never touched Revit. We hired them because they had the soft skills, the drive, the motivation to want to learn, to want to be a part of the culture. They fit with everything else that we do. And we've just slowly built them up. They're gaining that experience. It's a lot easier to train them how to do Revit than it is to train them on how to communicate well with people or time management or other soft skills. So that was our big goal when we were looking for younger people. While we needed people to draft, like anyone does, that was not our priority. We understood that it's the long game, as Michael said. We're trying to build them up in their career here. Whether they stay with us or they go is solely up to them on whether or not this is the perfect fit for them. But we understand that getting them up to speed would help us a lot more in the long run.
I can build on that. I think before anybody needs to think about hiring anybody, do you have a mission, vision, strategic plan, and tactics for implementing your business strategy and your strategic plan for the 5-year, 10-year outlook for your firm? Because if you haven't answered those questions, you have no idea whether you need to hire somebody or not. Also, the next question, once you've got a mission and you've got a vision and you have a business strategy and some alignment in your operations for that, that will help you understand who you're trying to hire. To Michael's point, are you trying to hire drafters or are you trying to hire an architect that you want to grow up? And I think that's one of those big questions that a lot of smaller firms are asking is, am I growing people up to grow them out, or am I growing people up to keep them? And I think especially smaller firms need to have that question answered, and they need to have that honesty and open conversation with the people that they are hiring, because there is nothing wrong with being a stepping stone firm. There is nothing wrong with telling an interview candidate, like, hey, look, we have this position and it needs filled, but there might come a time 5 years from now where you're looking to move on from us, and that's going to be okay, and we're going to help you. We're going to grow you as much as we can, and then when we think you've reached a ceiling here, let's help you spread your wings and find something else. And I think that every interviewee is owed that explanation, but it's going to be hard to give them that explanation if, as a firm, we haven't looked inward and we don't understand where we're going. So that looking inward applies to interviewees and to firms as wholes.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And another adage that I can't remember who it's attributed to, but it's that question, what if I train somebody, pour all this time and effort and so on into training somebody and they leave, and then the person that you're talking to says, yeah, but what if you don't and they stay? Right. So you've got to balance those things. Certainly. We actually have someone in the audience right now. It's Tim Dearborn, that says, while listening to this great talk, I'm writing a job offer to a recent college graduate. What should we be calling these dynamic young people who are entering the profession? When I started, we called them an intern. That isn't correct in today's world. So what do we call them?
Can I take this one?
Absolutely.
Call them a designer. Architecture is the only profession that refers to people as interns who have 6, 7, 8 years of education or 20 years of experience. They just don't have that license, and so they're considered an intern. I wish we would eliminate that word. The word intern means that you work for free and you don't get paid and you're doing it for experience, and that's not who we are as a profession. So I would just call them a designer. It's a title. It doesn't mean anything. Designer, project manager. You can't use the word architect, architectural in most states. And so, just keep it simple. Designer.
Yeah, that's great advice. And one that comes up all the time, because as you said, we've got this, I think there's this culture, right? And that needs to change. Again, we're almost to the top of the hour, or right at it. So this is another one of those conversations that I would be super happy just to sit here for the next 2 hours and continue this conversation, because it's a great one. But respecting everyone's time, maybe just in a minute or so, any last thoughts? And we'll start with you, Mike Riscica, since you're on that side of the screen. Any last thoughts, pieces of advice as we wrap the conversation up?
Yeah, I would say just pay attention to what gets you excited, what keeps you excited, what the stuff you like to do. It's not going to make sense as you're figuring out, but there's a lot of data there, and keep leaning towards that and keep moving towards what you think is fun, and you'll figure it out. You'll get there.
Great. Michael Celauro, any last thoughts from you?
Yeah, I echo that. Figure out what you want to do. Figure out what you're good at, what you're passionate about, and then just go after it. Whether it's in a firm for a specific role or overall job type. If you like technology and you want to get more into the technological side of things, go out there and ask for it. Or better yet, to just take the initiative, right? Go do your research, present it to your boss, say, hey, look, I think this is a better way that we can do things based on what I'm passionate about. That's how I got to where I am. I think that's super valuable to both an employee and an employer.
That's great advice. How about you, Rachel?
I will just echo what Michael and Michael have said. Goal setting. Don't be afraid to not have goals just yet. If you're just starting out, just get started and the goals will come to you. But take time to pause and create those goals periodically so that you can really understand yourself and where you're going. And then if you're an employer, it's the same exact advice. Set some goals, know who you are and where you're going.
Also great advice. One thing that I would like to say, because there's this thread that's kind of weaving through that we haven't really explicitly touched on, but it's come up in a lot of the commentary that we've had in this conversation. And it's really about professionalism. There is a architects tend to complain a lot, right? We complain about the profession and how people see us and value us or don't value us or things like that. I know it's a surprise to everybody, but it happens. Maybe it's just in my bubble, but here's the thing. And I mentioned this earlier this week. I wrapped up an engagement with a large client a couple of weeks ago now, and they're $100 million company. I was giving the final presentation to the CEO and the COO and business development people, et cetera. And said, listen, here's the deal. You're a $100 million company. If you want to sustain that and you want to grow that, the very first thing you have to do is start acting like a $100 million company. Start conducting yourself like a $100 million company. So my advice to everybody in the profession is, if you want to be seen as a professional, whether on the employee side or on the employer side or the profession side, start acting like this is an actual profession. The goals that Rachel's talking about, the business that Michael Celauro's talking about, the licensure that Michael Riscica is talking about, it's all part of that. This is a profession. Let's start treating it as such so that people start seeing it and valuing it as such. So that's my soapbox moment of the day. but I think it's important. I think it's important to the continuation of everything that we talk about here on Context and Clarity. So with that, big thanks to Michael and Rachel for this conversation. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your passion, sharing your advice, sharing your experience, and also spreading the word about this. We've got a lot of people in this room. That really warms my heart, because I do think that this week of conversations and this conversation today are really important conversations, right? We're using the whole SCI-Arc thing, that whole panel discussion, as a springboard. And I love this conversation that we've had today, because it's 100% looking forward and positive and really great advice. So thank you, all three of you, for being here for this. I appreciate it. And for all of you out there in the audience, thank you. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining us for this conversation. All of your questions and comments, obviously we can't get to all of them, but the great thing is, with this technology that we have available to us and that we use, these conversations continue on. These are living documents. So you can go to wherever it is that you're watching or you're commenting from right now. The recording stays and the comments stay. And on most of these platforms, you can continue to comment. So for instance, if you're doing this on Facebook right now, whatever group or page you're on right now, if you, a week from now, comment, you respond to somebody's comment, it's going to pop this conversation back up to the top of somebody's feed. So I'd encourage you to invite other people to watch the recordings and continue the conversation and the commentary, because it will help us spread this to more people that need to hear this and need to participate in this. So thank you to all of you. Appreciate all of you for being a part of this. As always, this is how we can improve the profession. This is how we can change the culture of the profession as we go forward. Let me give you a really quick preview of what's coming up on Context and Clarity. Of course, tomorrow we're going to talk about finding your role in the profession. If you'd like to join us for that conversation, come on over to the EntreArchitect Community Facebook group at 4 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. We'll also have the same conversation in a different format on Clubhouse at 9 a.m. Eastern for our coffee talk. And then as we look at next week for Context and Clarity Live, our guest will be Jonathan Stark, who talks a lot about how you charge for your services and maybe value-based fees. So my guess is next week we're going to talk a lot about more business of architecture and how we come up with those fees and how we value the services that we provide. So look out for that next week. And then coming up the week after that, which would be next week, will be April 28th. The following week would be May 5th. We'll have Gloria Cloder. And I'm assuming we'll talk a lot about foreign architects. We'll talk a lot about female architects. And as always, we value inclusion and diversity and equity in all of these conversations. These are conversations that we need to have more and more. So we're looking forward to that week of conversations, and specifically Gloria on Thursday, May 5th. So with that, again, thanks everybody. Appreciate you. Thanks for being here. Take a little bit of time to breathe this afternoon, tonight, relax a little bit, find a way to get rejuvenated, because we're going to do this all over again tomorrow. Be well, stay safe, keep those around you safe and well, and I hope that I'll see you somewhere sometime soon. Thanks, everybody.